Welcome to the Brewers Weekly Rundown Podcast, a production of the Flixation Podcast Network.
Brewers down to their final out now. Now up to Christian Yelich. Here it is. Yelich sends one to right center and deep. Get up! Get up! Get out of here and gone for Yelich. He has tied the game.
Hey folks, welcome to episode 3 of the Brewers Weekly Rundown Podcast. Glad to have you here with us. My name, Eric Madsen. I'm here at Flixation Studios in P City, Wisco. Dr. Will Flanders here from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Will, welcome to the show.
Good evening.
And from the Door County area, Wisconsin, Michael Smith back with us once again. Michael, what's happening?
Happy to be back. Big week in news.
It is. There is some stuff to talk about here tonight. Before we do that, let's talk about where to get a hold of the show here. You can email us at brewersrundown@gmail.com. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at brewersweekly. Like our page on Facebook. We have a voicemail line that you can call or text anytime, 24/7. That's 608-535-9302. Drop us a line. Let us know what you think and where you're at with the Brewers this year. You can find this show right now on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Plex Podcasts, Apple. We're working on it, and in fact, I have not told these guys yet, but good news, guys, Apple has accepted the show, so should be up just about the time this episode releases. So we will be available on Apple by the time you hear this, so you can check us out there. YouTube is coming. I just need some time to get that set up, and iHeartRadio will be a little bit down the road. Apparently you have to exist for over a month before they will take you. So all those platforms will be on in the eventual future, but for now you can still get us on most everything else. If you can do us a quick favor anytime, the best thing you can do for us is go to the store of the carrier you have to listen to this show on and give us a lofty star rating or a quick review. That helps us move up in the directories and stuff, so you can help other folks find us easier by doing that. All right, I got a couple of things we'd like to discuss tonight. A little bit of good news here, guys. So Christian Yelich very likely to sign an extension here. By the time this episode airs, the extension should have been signed. It's set to actually happen tomorrow for us here. So details are still a little unclear, but it sounds like we have most of the things down here, and we can get into what we know in a minute. But Will, your initial reaction? Did any of us think this was going to happen?
So I will definitely admit that I did not expect this. Anyone that's interacted with me on social media in the past year or so, as people would say, are we going to sign Yelich to an extension? I was definitely one of the doubters. You look at the payroll cutting that was happening in the offseason. You look at just the overall budget of the team and what guys like Mike Trout and Machado on the free agent market were getting. I just did not see a path to this happening. So yesterday when I heard the news that this was potentially sort of rumored and then sort of some confirmation from some of the media folks like Ken Rosenthal, it was very exciting. I think this is an exciting moment for the Brewers. It's obviously the biggest free agent contract they've ever signed. We can talk about that in a few minutes, but hard to spin this as a negative, although I think some people are going to try, and we can discuss that as well.
I'm ecstatic. I also was probably one of the more pessimistic people that wasn't sure this could be a possibility. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact a lot of the experts predicted him to get $30 to $40 million a year. And, value-wise, we looks like so far that we got better than that. And, there was a talk for a while that Yelich wanted to stay and that he'd consider giving us a hometown discount. And there's a lot of pessimism with that. But it appears to be that was part of the case. And then on top of that, the injury probably actually benefited us in making him more affordable and more willing to commit earlier and not risk it.
The details we think we know right now are that so Yelich is sitting on a 3-year deal currently, 2 years with a club option. It sounds like the club option has been torn up. He will receive his current signed salary for the next 2 years, which would be $12 million this season, $14.5 in 2021. And then he would start making, it's roughly 24 to 27 million. So I've seen figures back and forth between that. I guess it's not solid, but somewhere in there, we're talking like through 2029 here. So this goes 9-10 years. There's probably going to be an option in there. There's probably some deferments and stuff in there as well. So, yeah, hometown discount, no doubt. So, yeah, there's some complaints by the union, which are not surprising. That's what they do. I don't know. This is just a great team-friendly deal.
Yeah, no, I think there was an article by Ken Rosenthal, this afternoon, sort of a follow-up piece to his initial reporting of the deal. And, what was in there was a really sort of, as we talked about before we went on the air, sort of taking both sides. The argument of the union being that this is too much of a hometown discount, as we've been saying. The argument on the other side being that maybe the Brewers weren't smart to commit this much money over this long of a time frame. I think it was an odd piece. It was odd in that he's taking both sides there and saying it's bad from both ends of the spectrum. And it's kind of curious to me, why you would put a piece like that out there. I don't think Rosenthal's the kind of guy that's usually just going after X number of clicks. I think he's usually a pretty solid reporter. But I think in this piece, the hometown discount primarily I think comes in the first couple of years. The fact that we're not getting a tearing up of the entire contract, that he's only going to make the 12 to 14 million over the next couple of years. That's huge. Next year Braun's salary comes off the books, and we're still paying Yelich in the range that we were going to be paying him previously. That's $20 million more for the team to play with. So I think that's where the huge discount comes in. In terms of the annual value in the subsequent years, it's a little bit lower. We're in the Bryce Harper range. We know Harper took the huge long-term deal rather than taking the you got the most years rather than the most money per year. So we're kind of in that range, the Mookie Betts range, not quite up there with Machado and Trout. Though I think, for Trout, he's been performing at this level for, quite a few more years. He's been performing at this level essentially since he entered the big leagues. With Yelich, we're kind of looking at 2 years where he's been at a Trout-like level. So maybe that explains a little bit of the discount. But I think that there is, there's the expressions that he had of wanting to stay in Milwaukee. I think were proven true by this, that he was willing to negotiate and clearly wanted to stay here. And I think in saying the Brewers can't afford this, I think they're not looking at the sort of whole picture, because there will be some revenue coming off, or some spending coming off the books, and there's the potential for getting up to that salary range we were at in the previous year and adding some more pieces.
So some sources do cite that, looking at the probable payroll for the Brewers, just based on the last couple of years, and a TB deal, and it gets renegotiated next year, but I don't expect a big raise or anything there. So he's likely commanding something from like 30 to 35% of the entire payroll. It's fair to ask, is that too much? For me, I really want to see how this team pans out this year to really test that theory, I guess, in the new way the Brewers operate here. But I think it's a fantastic deal. I think you take it if you can get it. Really helps the fan base, kind of, a pessimistic fan base this year. So it livens them up a bit. They do have detractors and things still, but
As Will kind of alluded to, I definitely think when you look at the contract, it's pretty much just replacing what Braun has been getting for a while now, about $20 million or so, and we're not paying him that the next couple years, and it averages out to that. Over time, if you subtract those couple years, it's closer to 27, but that's still far and away a lot different than $30 to $40 million. Paying an outfielder that kind of money is seen as a little less risky than paying a pitcher that, the injury, as I said, almost kind of benefited us with maybe making Yelich a little more willing to not want to risk it coming off that injury, but he appears to be healthy and ready to go. And just a lot of factors really played in our favor, and Yelich saying what he said all along, he meant it. And if you look at the kind of the time where, most players peak around 28 or so, and Yelich is going to be 28 this year. Braun's best season by WAR was when he was 27. He had a good when he was 28, and then he declined real quickly the couple seasons after that. A lot of predictors have Yelich, even in the later years of his career, still having a WAR of over 4. And if you break that down financially, that's still really good value. But I personally don't think we've seen the best of Yelich yet. I think he's a little bit more of a late bloomer, and I think there's going to be good things to come up until possibly the very end of the contract. Let's just hope he can stay healthy and that the Brewers are willing to spend some money around him and not all put most of their payroll in the outfield and see if we can't get some pitching.
I think that you look at the last couple years, like Fangraphs kind of does an estimate of the actual value of a player, and he's been so outside the norms with these WARs of over 7 these past couple years. That their estimate is the last 2 years he's been worth $60 million in 2018 and $62 million in 2019. There's just crazy numbers, right? No one's making that kind of number, and the economics of the sport don't allow for so far. They probably will at some point, but for salaries quite that high. So when you look at that value, even if there's some regression, even if we're down at 5 to 6 WAR, might be expected, a little bit of a reduction in some of the crazy video game like figures that he's been putting up, I think it'll still be a contract that'll pay for itself in the first few years. When you get in those late years, there are the back issues. There is the new knee problem that we had this year. There is the potential that we'll be saying the same thing we say about Braun these days, right? People kind of forget about the good years because they're back in 2011 and 12, and kind of remember the later performance, and we feel like we're overpaying. So, more than likely with almost every player, there will be some, something like that at some point. But I think the contract is likely to have paid for itself by then.
Yeah, I see this, as I said before, replacing Braun's contract, really. When you look at the WAR, Braun, I feel like he definitely peaked a lot earlier than Yelich. And if you can kind of look at a almost side-by-side comparison when you look at the years, but in the bigger picture, throughout his career in 13 seasons, Braun has a WAR of 48.2, and in 7 seasons, Yelich has a WAR of 33.6. When he was 25, it went from 5.5 to 5.1 to 7.1 when he was 27, 6.2 at 28, and then he declined rapidly after that. We know what happened around that time. When he was 29, he went down to 1.8, and then when he was 30.4, then he got back up to 3.1, but that's pretty big decline pretty quickly. And then we look at Yelich, when he was 25, WAR of 4.5, then 6.9. Last year, he took a little hit from the injury and missing the end of the season, so he was at 6.6. But the way he's trending, it looks like the value we're getting in this contract is going to far out produce what Braun did, and I think there's just so much more to come from him, and it's just such a good deal. If even the worst predictors towards the end of his career are about 4.5 in the middle, and he gets down to about the part where we're talking where Braun was, but this just looks really good overall, and I'm just so excited.
Payroll-wise, it's interesting too, as by the time we get to 2022, right now we would only have four or five players on contract at that point. So lots of room to operate. Stearns can pretty much go any way with it. We'll see how the profits generate the next couple of years. I feel like 2020, maybe next year, the next 2 years, not this year, but the next 2 years are the window I see for whatever reason. But that's just kind of pulling something out of my ass. But yeah, there's nothing but room to operate here in the future.
Yeah, I think that's right. When we're only paying him $14 million next year and Braun off the books, and I'm trying to think who else. I guess that's our only. We'll still have Kane under contract. Is Kane 2022? Is that right? I think that's his last year.
Yeah.
So we'll have Kane the entire time. The Rosenthal article also talked about the Kane deal looking bad at this point. I'd also argue there that potentially there were some injuries that played a role, and Kane may not. He's still young enough to have a chance for somewhat of a rebound. But no, I think you're right. I think I would also say that. The next couple years of the window, I saw some people online saying, this actually increased their frustration about the offseason because, we're not going out and, using some of the space that we did last year, this year. But I think, the next offseason could be a pretty exciting one, obviously, depending on what we see this year.
We did end up getting closer to last year's payroll than I really expected even a month or two ago. Didn't realize it was within 20 million basically of last year. So let's not forget, people, last year was a record for the Brewers. It's the highest they've ever started the season with. And they ended up $20-some million past that at the end of the year. So I still have a really positive feeling about this team. I think the lineup, at least the floor is improved. But I don't know. I think it's a solid-looking lineup. The pitching definitely could be better than last year. It remains to be seen if it will. Some spring stuff still need to be worked out, but I don't know. Feeling good about the window. Let's talk about camp a little bit, guys, while we mention it here. We've had another week here to observe things going on in Arizona. Michael, what have you seen in camp this week?
Had a couple moments of some sloppy defense. Seems like the team's been a little sluggish to get hit, but it's not your everyday players playing. But we had the one-hit game with Morrison given the only hit, and we had a couple 4-hit games in there, 5-hit games. But the relief pitching still continues to look good, and the starting pitching continues to look good. I don't think Miller's given up a run yet, and Burns has looked pretty well as also. So there are definitely some things to be optimistic about as far as camp. Some other guys have been a little bit slower to start, Sogard being one of them, but Arcias looked real good. Morrison's looked real good, but some other bats need to get going. Narvaez started to get the hitting going today, it looked like, and we'll see if they can build off that. And Kane has also looked really good early.
Yeah, that's the Kane thing is great news for sure so far. Again, small sample size, although it is getting bigger as we go along here, obviously. Will, how has camp looked for you this week?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing to me this week was, as Mike mentioned, Burns going out there and having 3 good innings. There were a couple shaky things. There was a hit batter. There were, I think, a couple walks, but overall, it was a positive performance, and you could see that he was doing a fist pump and he was actually excited. I think, he needs these kind of things. He needs these positive outings. We talked about, or it's been talked about, how he was seeing a sports psychologist, right, in the off season. This isn't for him. This wasn't a physical issue as much as it is maybe like a mental issue, sort of like what we've seen in the past with players who get, the yips and things like that. It seemed like Burns was headed down that road. But the early returns are positive for him. And I think that's really could, have a dramatic impact on what we see for the starting rotation in that, if he's actually a solid piece, if he can be a number 3 or 4 starter, it can change the whole composition. We might actually have too many pitchers in the starting rotation rather than what people were worried about in December, including myself, that we wouldn't have enough solid starting pitching. So that's the most intriguing thing for me this week. I think that across the board, I think as Mike said, we're getting a bigger sample size. I still wouldn't put too much on guys that are off to a slow start or guys that are off to a really hot start. You never know what's being worked on, and it's hard to assess the quality of the opponents that they're either getting hits off of or not. So, but that's the most positive thing I think for me this week is hopefully Burns can keep this going. And
Arcia still making the most of his spring, so still on the right track there. It's
also, I forgot to say, Urias is apparently going to come back and actually playing games. That was something that wasn't expected, and that might push RCA even harder.
All right, guys. So our other topic of discussion tonight, it's something we've been kind of kicking around here for, I don't know, since pretty much spring started. Logan Morrison, guys, a camp invitee for the Brewers this year. He's been in the league about 7 seasons now. He's kind of been up and down. Typical position is first base. I don't think he really... It's said he can play some outfield in a pinch. Clearly the Brewers, no room out there. First base seems a little clogged as well. So Morrison having a fantastic spring, knocking the cover off the ball. As Michael said, in that one game, he was the only guy to get a hit. So he's making the most of his appearances here. Fans really latching on, of course, because he is hot in this small sample size. So, I mean, we've always had trouble figuring out where he would even fit in on this team. So say he continues this hot streak. Do either of you guys, I guess we'll throw it to Will first, do either of you guys see any path here for Logan Morrison to stay on the team here? Do they sign him? Can they sign and trade him? What do you see here, Will?
Yeah, so I think that I'll give both sides, which probably isn't what we should do sometimes, but I can see, as I've thought about it more, we functioned last year on a 25-man roster, and we may or may not talk about all the rules changes tonight, but one of the rules changes, we have a 26-man roster this year. So theoretically, that's a free spot. Theoretically, that's, given that we can function and run the team with 25 people on the roster, the 26th spot can really be whatever position benefits the team the most. And if in the end, Morrison is doing well enough that, it looks like that's the best option, I guess there is a way that he could fill the 26th spot. I'm still leaning towards the other position. And, and by the way, we put a poll on our Facebook page, and most people thought that he could make the team. So it seems like the fan base, as you mentioned, is on that side. But I think I'm still leaning the other way, in that when you look at the roster, when you look at who has options and who can be sent down, there's just not a spot for a second or for a third for first baseman. Braun, I think, will be playing more first than outfield this year. And if Braun is essentially the other first baseman along with Smoke, it just doesn't make sense to have another another first baseman on the team when you can have those guys with infield outfield versatility, guys like Jerko and Ryan Healy and guys like that can come in the game and play different positions. I still think it's going to be a tough job for him to actually make the squad.
I really just don't see any room for him. I mean, we have Arcia and Urias, and we have Sogard and Gurko, and we have Hura, and then we have Holt too, and we have Smoke, and then Braun's going to be fighting for playing time. I just don't see where there's room for him. Healy is a guy we'll probably see at some point in the season with him having options. We might see Rodriguez too. Gamble could get sent up and down, but Morrison, I don't believe at this point in his career would have any options. So, maybe we start the year with him kind of like we did with Choi and have a few first basemen and then trade one of them. But he's going to command a lot higher price than someone with a league minimum salary or a little there over. I mean, he's not too far removed from making $5.5 million I believe that was with Minnesota. The other thing with him, I mean, he hasn't batted over 200 since 2017. He strikes out a lot, and the biggest factor is he just hasn't stayed healthy his whole career. I mean, he said in quotes that, when healthy, he's an all-star, but he just hasn't been healthy. He does claim to be healthy this year, and he certainly looks like it, but it's just a risk-reward type thing. And, Braun fighting for playing time, I think of all people would probably be very against Morrison being on the team, because it would be taking playing time away from him. But on the same side, we have went with multiple first basemen before, but Smoke being a switch hitter and then having Braun, I don't know that there's really room after that. But I have a feeling if he doesn't make the team, that he will find the way into somebody's roster this season.
He says he will not take any kind of minor league deal. So, and if he continues on this and with his past potential, I mean, he had a fantastic 2017, almost hitting 40 homers, batting .250. In no other year even close to that, but he's kind of been up and down. 15 homers, 20 homers. Without injuries, he's definitely got potential, but yeah, I think he's going to be an expensive risk. Well, at least expensive for what he is. So I don't see the Brewers taking that. Put the show, because it was new, out there and ask some people for some feedback. And some of the stuff we heard was some griping about our kind of safe dark horse picks and stuff that we made last week. I do want to say originally, when we talked about the dark horse picks, I was definitely going with Logan Morrison. I mean, I told you guys that straight out. But when it came down to making the episode and saying it on the air, I had thought about it, and I was like, it doesn't make sense to pick a dark horse that's not going to make this team. So, yeah, people said, yeah, he should have picked guys like Morrison and stuff, but I don't see it as a realistic option for the Brewers right now. Could be wrong.
Gotta be bold, man. Gotta make those off the wall picks.
Yeah, well, it's definitely it's definitely potential if he gets on the team, but I agree with you. I mean, we're talking about 7 or 8 games, right? We're talking about 2 series, and you think about guys that over the course of the season are sort of a flash in the pan, right? And there are a lot of guys that can get hot for 2 series. We're definitely still in the small sample size realm with him, and on Baseball Reference you can see like opponent quality. So what is where does the average person that he's facing in spring training rank? And right now he's at 8.5 out of 10, which they rank as about a little bit better than AAA. So he's not quite, it's not, of course that's what you expect in spring training, that you're facing a variety of pitchers, but it's certainly not the case that he's doing this against completely major league quality pitching. So small sample size and doing it against some guys that are likely to be in AAA or AA when the year starts as well.
I don't think we really touched on it, but I could see his path. He's here for depth too. He's here to bring on competition, but injury is honestly his best path towards a team too. And though he hasn't played outfield in quite some time, back in like 2012 and the years following that, he did play a fair bit of outfielder. He's not the best outfielder, and the 2 positions he plays are both complete log jams. So we'll see what happens.
What do you guys think is, and we talked about this off the air, but what is the reason for bringing in guys like Jace Peterson and Morrison? Is it purely in the case of injury? I mean, it's hard for me to see the motivation with guys with no options, especially a guy like Morrison who says that he won't go to AAA. Is it just in case Smoke goes down with an injury, or do you think there's some other thoughts as well that go into that?
That's a good question. I think the injury is a big part of it. Bringing competition in is a big part of it. But the other part of it is no one had asked them to camp yet, and they feel like they're going to make a major league team. And whether it's with this one or not, they're going to take that opportunity to show off their skills for the rest of baseball.
Yeah, I definitely understand why he would come here. Part of the question that Will asked, though, that kind of perplexes me is why do the Brewers bring him? I get depth and competition, but Yeah, it seems because I don't know, he's got a lot of potential, and I hate to, I don't know, it's a weird nitpick, but I hate to like showcase a guy for teams you're going to be competing against when there's pretty much no chance he's going to make your roster. So I don't know. I guess I can see it both ways, but it seems a little weird to me if there's absolutely no plan in the organization for people. Why bother?
We've been talking about depth for a while, and I think this is just, at the same time, another depth move. You got to have that depth even in spring for the roster, just in case. But, maybe he didn't feel like he was getting a lot of bites from other teams, and when that came up too, that's why he sees the opportunity. But it is kind of weird to take that, especially when you say you're not going to accept an assignment, but maybe he really feels confident that he could make the team, but I think he'll be playing in a different uniform.
For sure. I will say, when we were talking to some other people on threads about this, there was a lot of, well, we got the extra roster spot, that there it is, case closed. I mean, we all know we have the extra roster spot, and it can't be used for a pitcher, but 2.5, 3 first basemen deep on the major league level, I just don't see it.
Yeah, especially with a guy who can't be sent down, right? Especially with a guy who doesn't have options. So you kind of want a guy in that spot that you can rotate out, and he's not one of those guys. So
if any of you listeners out there have some better idea of where Logan Morrison fits here, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Email the show, call, text the voicemail line, or just post on our Facebook page or whatever. We'd definitely love to hear what you're thinking. For anything really, but specifically this Logan Morrison thing. And who knows, by the time we get around to next week, he may have cooled off. I don't know. We'll see. Any topic we talk about, shoot us an email or whatever. We want to hear your thoughts on it. So let's close out the show here. Let's talk a little bit. We'll run through those new baseball rules here quickly that we referred to earlier. Of course, there was a lot of talk about these over the course of the off season. They did not make them official till right at the beginning of spring here. So, all right, we have the 3 batter minimum here now, guys. No more bringing in relief pitchers for one guy, unless it's like the last out of an inning. The 3 batter minimum is negated by the end of an inning, so you don't have to bring a guy back out to face the second or third batters. Cutting down on the uses of specialists a little bit here, guys. I don't know. It seems like that the use of specialists was a little bit on decline the last 5 or so seasons, but Brewers had a couple of them last year. Claudio actually pitched a lot more multiple batter innings than last year than he has recently, so the Brewers are actually sort of moving away from that a little bit anyway.
This one really bothers me. I just think it takes away a lot of the gamesmanship and the strategy out of baseball. This is also a point where if someone is really for this and really likes the rule, definitely call or email us, because we want to hear your take on that. But I just really haven't heard anybody with a take that really likes this. We were talking earlier about the Players Union not maybe getting behind Yelich and giving us the hometown discount. Well, the Players Union is not real happy about this rule, and this is one of their gripes too, because it devaluates players, or it makes a player like Hader kind of have an undefined role. And if he's succeeding and he doesn't feel like he's getting his value, that definitely changes things. I think it's really gonna, Council is gonna maybe change his strategy a little bit, or he might just bring out a pitcher for the extra third of an inning to start the next inning versus changing the guy, or maybe he'll leave in a guy a little bit longer with all those factors in place.
I'm someone who's sympathetic to speeding up the game, but this isn't a rule change that's really going to have any sort of a dramatic impact on speeding up the game. I think I saw an article a few weeks ago that the instance where a pitcher comes in and only pitches to one batter only happens about every 3.5 games. So every 3.5 games, we'll have a situation where theoretically this rule change would have made an impact. And I think, as Mike said, the change in strategy that's going to result from this is much more of a detriment to the game than any sort of benefit that's derived from saving 2 minutes every 3.5 games. Yeah, I am sympathetic to rules changes to speed up the game, but as a team like the Brewers that really relies on thinking outside the box and really relies on matchups and being ahead of the curve when it comes to making moves. We see it in September where Counsell has been very effective at making the moves to sort of get more out of the team than you might expect. I think this is the kind of thing that's going to hurt the small market teams and the teams that have to use those strategies like us, like Tampa, more than some of the big market teams. But even then, it's kind of on the margins. It's sort of a change that we probably won't notice in most games. But I still think it just was a dumb move, and the commissioner's been racking up a lot of those sorts of moves of late.
All right, so roster size changes. We do get the extra roster spot here for the first few months of the season. Goes from 25 to 26, and that can't be an extra pitcher. So only 13 pitchers allowed in the 26-man roster. So one more slot here for a position player. It's hard to argue that won't help most teams. And smaller rosters in September now, guys. The 40-man unit in September now down to 28 with a max of 14 pitchers. Definitely a game changer for the way the Brewers have run the last couple of years here, Will.
Yeah, we're not going to have Craig Tember this year, right? We're not going to see what we've seen in the past where, as I just said, Counsell has proven, I think, better than most, and I'm not sure Mike might disagree on this point, but better than most at sort of manipulating the roster in the later part of the season, being willing to get all of the maximal matchups that you can, and that's not going to be possible, with 14 pitchers only one more than you can have in the rest of the season. There's not really going to be much room at all for doing much other than bringing in one guy who might be an effective reliever across the board. That said, I think that the expanded rosters probably have been exploited a little bit more in the last few years. I think 20 years ago, primarily the spirit of the rule was to get some guys up from the minor leagues that you might want to try out for next season. It's certainly become used a lot more strategically in the past few years. And that does, I think in September, it does lengthen games substantially when you have pitcher after pitcher being trotted out there. So I'm sympathetic to that rule, but I do recognize that it actually could have a negative effect on us. But the Brewers have shown that they're sort of able to think outside the box, and maybe this will just present new opportunities to do it in a different way.
Counsell's made a living at doing well in September, but with that we have to keep in mind that we had all these rested arms, and we could bring in a bunch of different pitchers for an inning that were just fresh up for AAA, or their season was done, and we're not going to be able to do that now, and we're going to have to stretch out pitchers longer, and he's going to really need to evaluate how he uses the pitchers even come September, because it's not going to be expanded as much. And then off the 26-man roster too, you have to think that last player, there's going to be a lot more pressure on the what you'd maybe call the bottom two or the last men in to perform, because they can bring up someone else. But we have the depth to do that. But it'll be really interesting to see what Counsell does this September, after absolutely being one of the best managers in September here recently, and really where we've gotten most of the wins the last couple of years comparatively to the rest of the season. But on the other side, if your team's out of it come September, the expanded rosters give you hope, and it gives you a look at all these other players and what you're looking forward to, and giving them some major league at bats, and that's getting taken away from them, and that's got to be another thing that players union just isn't happy about with these rule changes.
All right, so we have the two-way player designation, which I don't think we'll dig into too much. Players that play pitchers and position players, or DH, as a matter of fact, works as well. There's stipulations for how you can be named a two-way player. There's very few. There's only 2 or 3 in the league now. Nothing the Brewers are dealing with, so we won't talk about that too much. Position players pitching has been regulated here. they can only do so in extra innings, or if the game is 6 runs, or is it 7 runs? It's 7 runs or more lopsided. I don't know how often that was happening where people were throwing out position players. I know it happened a record number of times last year, but I don't know how many times it happened in a game that had any kind of competitiveness to it. So again, I don't know if this rule needed to be made, but who knows what the Cubs will do. But we may not see Perez out on the mound this year, Will. Is that going to be tough to take?
Yeah, that's the biggest disappointment, and no Kratz either. I remember, he was. People were enjoying that a couple years ago as well, with Kratz out on the mound. I think this is, it's as the game's gotten more analytical, and as teams take a much colder look at what are we doing on a day-to-day basis in the game. I think there was a realization that when you're down 6 or 7 runs, essentially the chance of winning is all but 0, right? And there was, there's sort of a throwing in the towel when you put the position player on the mound. I think in terms of competitiveness, MLB, didn't like that. I think that they, thought, no, we don't want teams throwing the towel. Essentially, we don't want like a situation where fan interest declines because people think the teams are just giving up on games. This is one of those changes I'm okay with in general. There is a side of the coin where there is an increased risk of pitcher injuries if you literally are running short on pitchers a particular day. If you have a bullpen that's gassed and you don't really have any more pitchers that you want to bring in the game, so there is the potential there for some negative consequences. But I do understand the spirit of this rule and that we don't want teams throwing in the towel too early. We want at least fans to believe that there's a reason to stay past the 5th inning. In some of these situations, but the injury risk is definitely a concern.
Yeah, that was my biggest problem with the rule. I feel like it's promoting injury, which is the last thing pitchers in this league need. I don't know. I don't think it's been abused at all. I don't know if I saw it going down that road at all, this position players pitching. I know people kind of love it when it happens.
Yeah, it's literally one of my favorite things in baseball. It's another one of those situations in most sports. Maybe it's hard to tune in and watch the end, but it gives you something interesting to see, and nothing's more hilarious than seeing a position player strike out another position player.
Yeah.
Also with that, though, the injuries, I was going to bring up that point, too. They keep on talking about, players' health and player safety and doing all these things, and this seems very counterproductive to that. And to actually put a run amount on it, 7, I don't know. 7's quite a bit to come back, but we've done it in the last decade. We've come back 7 runs in the 9th. But with that, there's other factors. Did you just come off a 18-inning extra inning game and your bullpen's completely blown out? Has your bullpen been blown out all week? A 6-run lead, and when you have 2 hits and it's the 8th inning and you have a bunch of dead arms in the bullpen, you just leave that guy to get shelled or injured to give up the extra runs, and then you can feel good about doing it? I really don't understand this one, and it's another one that I don't think the Players Union is going to be happy about either.
All right, so a minor one here. This one seems pretty silly to me. They've shaved 10 seconds off the time you're allowed to make a challenge on a call. It was 30 seconds. It's now 20. I understand trying to speed up replay. I don't think this is the way to do it. 10 seconds, guys. What the hell is going on here? Useless rule.
So here's my ideal for replay. I think what we want to get to is, something closer to what the NFL or college football have, and that you essentially have until the next play starts to challenge or not. I think I don't enjoy the downtime where the manager is calling up to the box to decide whether or not we want to replay. And by the way, that's the kind of stuff that leads to what we saw with the Astros. Is the more cameras and the more their teams looking at cameras is what sort of led to that whole scandal. So my ideal would be to get to a situation where it's the manager's naked eye, and the manager has to decide, by the time the next pitch is thrown, whether or not they want to challenge it. And I think what that would lead to is we'd only see challenges in the most extreme circumstances. I think what we see way too often now is challenges on bang bang plays where we're used to just say the tie goes to the runner and that was it. Back 20 years ago before replay. I'd like replay to only happen when we have something that's clearly wrong. We have a real clear incorrect call that the manager can see on the field. When we have to slow things down, 100% to determine if maybe there's, by an inch the runner beat the throw or something of that nature, I think that's actually a negative for the game. And this is one where I think we're moving in the right direction here. I'm surprised I'm supporting some of these Manfred decisions more than I might think I would, but I think we're moving in the right direction. The shorter the time they have to make that decision, the more we're only going to see it on those really extreme cases. Baseball doesn't need to be playing as much as we have been, in my view.
Okay, I mean, I would just say with your next play theory, I don't really think that would work in baseball because the pitcher, depending on which way he wants that call to go, has the advantage of holding up that process where the batter sort of does, but not as much. So I don't know if that's the solution, but
that's a good point. And maybe it's just shortening the time frame. I think if we can actually get it where 20 seconds is enforced, I think we'd have something pretty close. But I think you're right about the holding the ball thing. That's a good point.
Yeah, this is pretty much a non-issue to me. It's another thing I don't understand where you're going to put a number on it, though. But the point off that would be the pitcher's trying to quick pitch and the guy in the box is trying to step out of the box. You don't want it to get like the NFL where we were benefited by this. We're going to just try to run a play or throw a quick pitch. I don't get that. But I also feel at the same time if you could make that decision in 30 seconds, I feel like you can make it in 20 seconds. But also with off that, you talked about the Astros and limiting abilities to look at views and stuff. Well, another rule that was changed before was limiting the visits at the mound, and I think that really had a negative impact.
So the last thing here on this will kind of affect the Brewers, who definitely use this. So the 10-day DL for pitchers no longer exists. That's moved back to a 15-day DL specifically for pitchers. The Brewers were always kind of keen on getting guys up and down. Additionally, that includes pitchers going down to the minors have to stay down there for 15 days as well. They can't come back any sooner than that. So Brewers, who have always, or at least the last couple of years, done a lot of jockeying with pitchers up and down, this extends that by 5 days. So I don't know how big an effect it will have overall, but it's definitely a different way of business for the Brewers this year.
Yeah, I mean, there's been situations where some teams have, maybe exaggerated what an injury was or used the system to do that. And I feel like this is baseball's way to kind of prevent that. But at the same time, there's different time frames for all injuries. And maybe a pitcher who, was going to miss only a start or only 2 starts. Well, maybe now a team thinks twice about doing it for 15 days because maybe he could get another start in there, or it just depends on with the days off and what the schedule is around that. I don't feel like it's going to affect position players quite as much because you have the extra man, and then with our team in particular, we just have a lot of depth. So, if we send someone down for 15 days, it's kind of a next man up situation, and we're fortunate to be in that situation.
Yeah, I think we're just seeing here as we've been discussing with these other rules, the unintended consequences, right? And the unintended consequence of what sounded like a good thing, a shorter DL stint, was that teams have gamed the system, and you can essentially only miss 1 start if you do it properly. When you use the 10-day DL. I think going back on it is a little difficult given what was just discussed, and that you don't want a team not putting a pitcher who truly needs to be on the DL or on the IL. You should use the new terminology on the IL. We don't want to be not putting them on just because we don't want to have them out for 15 days. So I think it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle on this one. They're going to try, but I think when you start seeing pitchers get injured, and the argument is they should have been on the IL for the short term, and they're not. Maybe that's going to lead some more bad press for baseball. But the bottom line is here, all this tinkering around the margins, often has bigger consequences than Manfred seems to realize. And, we can talk about the good and the bad of some of these new rule changes. The bottom line is, leaving things the same has been the mode of operation for baseball for 100 years, and it worked pretty well. And maybe Manfred could think about some of these, things. Maybe he can start thinking about the possibility there are things out there he hasn't considered when he's making all of these wholesale changes.
All right, so that's pretty much what we got here to talk about on episode 3 here tonight. I know we promised talk of the bullpen, obviously the Yelich news, and some other things we wanted to talk about, kind of nudge that down the road, but that could be up next here on episode 4 of the weekly Brewers Rundown. Otherwise, we'll talk about camp again, and I don't know what else. We'll probably find some other topic to dig into as well. So check us out on a weekly basis. Always glad to have you. Contact the show, brewersrundown@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter or Instagram at Brewers Weekly. Like us on Facebook. Call or text the voicemail line 608-535-9302. And please give us a star rating and a review in any of the podcast carriers. Review sections help other folks find the Brewers Weekly Rundown. My name, once again, Eric. You can find me on Twitter, Hazer, Hazer 75, or listen to any number of the other podcasts here on the Flixation Podcast Network. I am on all of them. Will Flanders, thanks for joining us as always. We've been chomping at the bit here to talk about this Yelich news, so I'm glad we finally got a chance to get that aired out.
Absolutely, and we all put our credibility on the line on the Morrison thing, so I don't know. I kind of have to hope he doesn't make the team now, though. You gave us a little bit of an out, so I'm glad there.
And Mike, always glad to have you here. Thanks as well.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. All the talk earlier, ended last week and early into this week was about Morrison, and then we got even bigger, better news. So it's been an exciting week for the Brewers.
Yes, it has, and we'll see how next week shapes up on episode 4 of the Brewers Weekly Rundown podcast. Until then, this is Eric for Will and Michael saying we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Brewers Weekly Rundown. It is a 2020 production of the Flixation Podcast Network. We will see you next time.